Okay, so now I want to walk through my reconstruction of the argument from Alston that you reconstructed together this week. Good work again. Everybody's getting better. The reconstructions are getting tighter, clearer, more precise, more rigorous. People are doing a better job of using a common argument pattern. You're only using premises that are true or false, statements, declarative statements that are true or false. Things are picking up. So I'm going to, and this is a tricky argument. I'm going to walk through how I would do it, but this is something that took me a long time to get it to where I was happy with it. And as usual, I have two versions of it actually, because I think there are kind of two ways that you could do it that's pretty good. There's more than two ways. There's always multiple ways to reconstruct an argument. And what you're trying to do is to find the most perspicuous, the most faithful, and the most charitable. So here's how I did it. So before you got started, you kind of saw where Alston was coming from. He's responding to people like Daniel Dennett. And Dennett says this: now, if you want to reason about faith and offer a reasoned and reason-responsive defense of faith as an extra category of belief worthy of special consideration, I'm eager to play. What I want to see is a reasoned ground for taking faith seriously as a way of getting to the truth. But you must not expect me to go along with your defense of faith as a path to truth if at any point you appeal to the very dispensation you are supposedly trying to justify. So in other words, go ahead, try to give me a reasoned defense of faith as a path to knowledge, as a path to the truth, but don't rely on any of the deliverances of faith when doing it. So in a lot of ways, I hope it reminds you of the argument we saw from Miriam Schoenfield, who said, look, when you put some set of beliefs in question, in order to recover those beliefs without begging the question, you can't rely on those beliefs. In other words, if some set of beliefs are put into question, then you cannot rely on those beliefs if you're going to recover them. You have to justify them by some other means. You can see Dennett kind of saying that here. He's saying, look, we've called faith as a category into question. Faith as a potential source of knowledge. We've called that into question. Now you have to justify it without relying on faith. But there's another way of looking at this, which is saying, well, the dialectic doesn't have the shape that Dennett imagines it having. Why is it that we have to put faith into question in this way? And if we put some other potential source of knowledge in question in the same way, it too would not be able to be recovered without appealing to the deliverances of that faculty. And that's exactly what Alston argues. Okay, now here, you can think about doing this in your reconstructions. You can take an acronym and make it stand for something else, and that can help you sort of keep your reconstruction more streamlined and easier to follow, I think. So let's say in this reconstruction, I'm going to let SOK stand for a source of knowledge, and I'm going to let ES stand for an epistemic standard that requires a source of knowledge to rationally demonstrate its reliability without appealing to its own deliverances. That epistemic standard, that's what Dennett is saying. Faith should be able to do this. If faith wants us to take it seriously as a source of knowledge, it should be able to justify itself without appealing to any evidence from faith. So this is how I see Alston responding to this claim from Dennett. Premise 1. If it's legitimate to demand that faith meet this epistemic standard to qualify as a bona fide source of knowledge, then any uncontroversially bona fide source of knowledge ought to be able to meet this epistemic standard. Premise 2. Perception, memory, and rational intuition are uncontroversially bona fide sources of knowledge that cannot meet this standard. Therefore, it's not legitimate to demand that faith meet ES to qualify as a bona fide source of knowledge. So that is a modus tollens by premises 1 and 2. So the relationship between P and Q is, if it's legitimate to demand that faith meet this standard, then any uncontroversial source of knowledge ought to be able to meet it. All of the known uncontroversial sources of knowledge that we have cannot meet it, so that's the not Q. Therefore, not P. It's not legitimate to demand that faith meet this standard. That's the basic structure of the argument. So basically, he's just saying, to say it's a double standard is to say that it requires faith to meet a standard that no other source of knowledge could meet. So, think about it. You can't justify perception without relying on at least some evidence from perception, because you have to be able to say, see, those are my perceptions, and they gave me some evidence that I could, work into my theory. And you can't justify memory without relying on memory somewhat. So you can say, see, those were my memories, and they turned out to be right. And same thing with rational intuition. In fact, rational intuition is an even more obvious case. So here's another version of Alston's argument. You could see Alston as making this argument. Premise 1, if it's legitimate for reason to demand that any source of knowledge meet this epistemic standard, then reason, as a source of knowledge, should be able to meet this epistemic standard. Reason cannot meet this epistemic standard. And there's a kind of suppressed premise here. Why? Because any rational demonstration will necessarily appeal to reason. You can't demonstrate something by argument without relying on reason. Argument is something that reason does. Therefore, it's not legitimate for reason to demand that any source of knowledge, including faith, meet this epistemic standard. So let's not confuse this for something that it isn't, okay? This is not an argument that proves that faith is a source of true belief, or that faith is a pathway to truth, or that faith is a legitimate source of knowledge. It is just a rebuttal argument. So a premise in Dennett's argument is that if faith is a legitimate source of knowledge, and we want to justify that rationally, we ought to be able to justify it without appealing to any evidence from faith. And this argument objects to that premise. It just says that premise doesn't work because there is no source of knowledge that could meet that epistemic standard. At least none of the ones that we rely on most crucially. Memory, perception, rational intuition, none of those things could meet that standard. So that is Alston's argument, and I think it's an important one. Like I said, it connects to some of the points that Miriam Schoenfeld was making, but it also connects in important ways to our next reading from Katia Vavova. Okay, thank you.